Hi, Marijane. Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Marijane McFadden and Mark Edward Rhodes. Marijane McFadden's first book, Eye of the Blackbird, won the 1995 Four-Way Books Intro Prize in Poetry. Devil Deer, McFadden's second book, was published in 2014 by the prestigious Alice James Books. Her poetry has appeared in local and national magazines and has been anthologized in collections by Scribner and Ballantine Books. In 2010, she was awarded a MacDowell Fellowship. McFadden taught English and poetry at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. A magnificent poet, Marijane McFadden.
Thank you, Harry. It's great to be back here. I thought I would start by reading a poem by a very famous Nobel Prize-winning poet. It just struck me that it was such a beautiful poem, and I just wanted to share it. It's Czesław Miłosz, as many of you may know, and the poem is called Winter. And I appreciate Miłosz so much because he's very, very serious. He doesn't deal with the light stuff. It's all profound and huge, weighty topics. And I just find I learn a lot from reading him. This poem is one of his late poems. And in fact, in it, he's saying goodbye. The poem is very dense, so I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of it so that you won't have to work at understanding and you can just enjoy the music of what he writes. The poem is occasioned by the death. A newspaper article, he sees the death of an old friend. And it was a friend that he had patronized because he felt he was somewhat inferior. And now he feels a little embarrassed by that and is looking more at his own issues. And so he goes on and how he passed judgment on people and so on and so forth. And then at the end is the especially beautiful farewell. It's called Winter by Czesław Miłosz, famous Polish poet. The pungent smells of a California winter, grayness and rosiness, an almost transparent full moon. I add logs to the fire. I drink and I ponder. In Ilawa, the news item said, at age 70, died Alexander Rimskiewicz, poet. He was the youngest in our group. I patronized him slightly, just as I patronized others for their inferior minds, though they had many virtues I couldn't touch. And so I am here, approaching the end of the century and of my life. Proud of my strength, yet embarrassed by the clearness of the view. Avant-gardes mixed with blood, the ashes of inconceivable arts, an omnium gathering of chaos. I passed judgment on that, though marked myself. This hasn't been the age for the righteous and the decent. I know what it means to beget monsters and to recognize in them myself. You, moon, you, Alexander, fire of cedar logs. Waters close over us. A name lasts but an instant. Not important whether the generations hold us in memory. Great was that chase with the hounds for the unattainable meaning of the world. And now I am ready to keep running when the sun rises beyond the borderlands of death. I already see mountain ridges in the heavenly forest, where beyond every essence, a new essence waits. You, music of my late years. I am called by a sound and a color which are more and more perfect. Do not die out, fire. Enter my dreams, love. Be young forever, seasons of the earth. I can hardly read that without getting choked up. And now back down to earth. I have a poem that I wrote some time ago, and it's something I've gotten interested in again. And so I'm going to read the first section of it. It's called My Father's Suitcase. And this is the first part of that. And it's, I think it's self-explanatory. June 1st, 1935. Now, that's not my dates. That's the date of a letter I'm quoting from here. Dear folks, I got a letter the other day saying that I have been accepted at Harvard Business School. So if I don't go, I'll lose the $10 application fee. I rather like the idea of going east for a year. I've never been very far away from home. I had 6 years left unborn to my life as his child. Still deep in my prior life in France on a farm. I fell down the cellar steps, frightened by a spider as I reached for a jar of jam. There was a timeless time of waiting, and then I dove on impulse and began to feel the hot press of human flesh again, and saw through my eyelids the amber light of earth, and tasted the blood and water of the human gate, and slid out at last from the rock that held me in its compassionate core, from the spark where I lived unmeasured, quiet, poised, awake, not thinking but thought. Who did the choosing of where and when and with whom? Like the hens that wander out of the garden and into my bedroom, 3 of them huddled together, lifting their legs up and down on the hard floor, necks stretched tall like periscopes, turning, peering deeply into a world they wanted to know, thinking, here is where the woman and the cats go, then thinking, maybe not. I followed an insight, plunged into the dark, which came to be a funnel or an elephant trap. The V of ibis flying north or south. There's no turning back. Think of it, the innocent weight of each moment. Why aren't we paralyzed by it? But we don't know. We never know just where we are in the air of it. Mm-hmm. So this is a poem I love. There's more to it than what I have time to read today. It's 5 or 6 pages, but it doesn't take up the whole page. So it's about the time when I first fell in love with poetry and started writing, and what a huge time it was in my life. And it's called Winter of 76. 8 coleus sprawled in plastic pots, set high on 2 stacked pallets, where windows from the south and west let warmth fall over them. I had left my marriage, rented 1 floor of a 2-story house. She had so many plants, my friend said, and I had a sunny space where they lived, generous, as weeks opened and shut, and the winter dark tipped toward us. Cedar wax wings filtered south, but the cardinals held, lit the branch above their nest while it snowed and kept on snowing. I put out seeds in suet balls and bowls of water, hot, so the birds could drink before it froze, and wrote and studied by their light. My mother had broken and couldn't seem to mend. There were reasons, we never understood them. Balked grief and rage at my father's death, childhood rape, I'm guessing. My stepfather weakened and thinned. Cancer killed him, that good man. He was a farmer. He had loved my mother since they were young. And when she married someone else, he stayed a bachelor, survived the war, waited a year, and when he knelt, he asked for both of us. The twins were born and 2 more kids. I was the oldest. I had my own room. Mother heard voices all along, held herself down. Once we were grown, the glue came loose. She hid the kitchen knives and all the guns, walked the railroad tracks at God's command, starved, sawed the tendons of her ankles and wrists, and lived on. Locked up, she escaped 3 times, swung herself over the concave fence, and walked and lost her shoes and her address. From my mother, I learned how much it mattered, my one life. I took a step, loved a woman who wanted me, and I began to write, hidden in my car, parked in a woods while my kids were in school. I pushed the pencil forward. I read wide and deep. My husband's contempt for me was so great, he wouldn't look at me. Walked in at night and didn't speak, ate the good meals I cooked and didn't taste them and didn't thank. I asked him to leave, but I left instead, hoping for a way forward, a way to take the children with me. 6 or 8 of my younger classmates sat at my kitchen table. Poems rolled and creased among long loaves of bread, blocks of cheese, and cheap red wine. I had made a hearty soup, needing to feed them as much as they needed to eat. We read our poems aloud. We read Auden and Lowell, Plath and Sexton and Elizabeth Bishop. Someone passed a joint as we took turns reading Ginsberg's Howl. We shouted, we roared, we tinkled our spoons like Tibetan bells. And we wept for love, for death, for genius, and for our own pathetic failures. Still, we were on the way. We were on to something big. We knew it for sure. Mm-hmm. We read Wallace Stevens. We read Carolyn Kaiser's Tying One On in Vienna in our drunkest diction, and her Summer Near the River. She was our teacher. We adored her outrageousness, her naked voice, the quick tears that wet her face. We read Kunitz, Rutke, Rilke, Williams. We read Hart Crane. Widely, wild benzine, rinsings from the moon, dissolve all but the windows of the mills. We read Louise Bogan, all those bright spirits that joined us in class and trailed us into my kitchen. We stayed up half the night. They didn't want to go home. I didn't want them to leave. It was the coldest winter of the century so far. The Chesapeake Bay froze over. One of the local families had skated down the Severn River to eat fried oyster sandwiches at a tavern near the river's outlet. My kids and I were there to watch the ships plunge intrepid toward the harbor as ice continents cracked and marbled in their wakes. The family put on coats and scarves, hats and skates, pulled the cords tight, and tied the knots with frozen fingers. Mittens went on last. Two of the men had brought hockey sticks and towed the tired children behind as they turned upriver. So that's the poem is longer than that, but that's the main part that I wanted to share. In this book, I Have the Blackbird. It's a story of, it's all one long poem, so I'm going to read a couple of excerpts. My childhood was, it was lonely and wonderful in many ways too. But there was so much I didn't understand. And so, and my mother was not talkative. And so I made stuff up a lot. And I had a lot of emotions I didn't understand either. And so I was not a bad child, but I wasn't a very good child either. I experimented a lot. And this is from one of that part. When I held the 5 tiny mice in my hand, alike as lima beans, and did not squeeze them, but put them back into the hay and prayed some mother mouse would find them and nurse them, it was not without the desire to poke pins in them and watch them squirm. Pity, like grief, comes into me the way pink breaks out of the stem one morning by itself after a rain or after a watering. Someone was kind to me all my life. Someone showed me the path into the orchard, lifted the groaning branch out of the way for me. Gently, someone led me into the center. My mother's sisters with their variations on her theme, their differently tinted peaches and cream, push into the fig tree, laughing, singing as if song were breathing, as if they were the handmaidens of something greater than I could see, a kind of life, a kind of feeling kin to what I felt, but sweeter, more innocent.
Good.
Moonlit mouse racing over the fields. The image itself released. The fear passed out of me into a word, to be separate from her, separate in my grief and in my bed, even as she fades now to a tube pumped full of food and drugs, poached, half rotten in sheets. Whatever beauty life gave, her flushed, rose-petaled face, her crooked fingers, her nose half noble, half ridiculous, her youth, her intelligence, her unreachable, overarching love, which was nevertheless love, is almost finished. It's morning. I have not slept well for weeks. The dreams of my waking life, the classes missed, the students left wanting, vain plans for getting rich. All night I stare at the blinded window. All night I hear the accents of Brooklyn throbbing in the streets. The fish I ate swims deep in me. The vapors of flesh and tiny flexible bones clatter together, marching, lining the walls of the dance. And this next one is it's of an evening I spent with my son, scratching paint off the wall in his bed. When the paint began to chip, we could see the monstrous eye waiting for us. The being from outer space, breathing there, lost till we began to pick its shell apart with our fingertips. The trombones of the universe blared beside us. My son in pajamas, beautiful as only boys are beautiful, among the lawful deaths by bomb and napalm, shrapnel sinking into its pudding of flesh. My son, who married his bear to a hound, producing a litter of coons, rabbits, snakes, each animal with its names, cousins, relationships, his peaceable kingdom crowding the sheets, hippopotamus ants, poodles got cheap from garage sales, filling the closets, loved and included, numbered and well. Beautiful as boys are beautiful who have not hardened into men, who cry still from fear. Under a dark sky, under the hard stars, in an old wooden bed that had sheltered my brothers, we knelt, whispering and picking at the paint. One shoulder pushed out of his misbuttoned pajama shirt. It was past his bedtime, and still we worked at the beast, the eye, the unknown quest. And we talked science fiction, as his father and I had talked before he was born. A whole green earth peopled with a race who gave up the need for power, the need to understand, and chose to live as trees. Who could have imagined men? Who could have anticipated men's machines? On we worked as the pale paint cracked and chipped and the night slipped away. The eye became a light, the steel a grisly smile, and then a broad flake of paint revealed a tire. We knew the rectangular shapes across the wall were cut-out sports cars some other boy had pasted there. Who was he? Where was he now? Living or dead or gone for a soldier? And had he imagined us? Had he thought of us at all? This child who never knew her father, except for the blown-up bits of him in the air. This child's son tucked deeply under the covers.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time?
We got about five or six more minutes.
Okay. I wanted to read this because I'm very interested in time, trying to comprehend it. And in this time where things are going so fast, you hardly know where you are. These bristlecone pines stand. And so that's the title, Bristlecone Pine. And bristlecone pines are the oldest living non-cloning trees on Earth. And there's one pine tree named Methuselah, and she's more than 5,000 years old. Her sprout broke the glacial ice, held where few beasts could reach her. 5,000 years passed. Soft skies whiffed, seasons snapped. Pyramids, civilizations hopped and skipped. Vast armies sparked, and yet the life in her pressed, and still the thick sap urges upward in a single living strip of bark. She stands, anchored in adamant. The eons in her wood arrest. Her years ring thinner than the thinnest paper. She stood at the making of our clay tablets and stands now at the end of books. So maybe we have about 3 more minutes.
Yes.
Is that right, Harry?
Yes.
Okay. I think I can read 2 more here. Thou Arbiter, it's this title. Where will we run without houses? What will we shout? The broken, the disarranged, those thwarted and blocked, the terrorized, those in childbirth, those in a ditch who changed their minds with closed fists, who were tampered with, the speechless, the smeared, those buried half alive, those who live without animals, who chopped down trees, the cursed, the outless. What will become of the mourners, those with emerald rings, or sitting sad in cafes, the ones who wish to be dolphins? All that time preparing ourselves. And when we are sucked into the dust bin with everyone we love and everyone we hate and all their kin, with elephants shot for their tusks, sows with their piglets, the jubilant, the generous, oh, sly order and force, what of all the candles we lit? Moon tongue, fountain, brothel of cowbird and fox, ink and papyrus, thou, arbiter of wolves, cranes, crows, and yarrow, may the mountains yet harbor the marmoset. May the condor loop once more over the bus. One more?
Yes.
Swimmer. Among the heavens and the creatures we leaned, barefoot, on a beach so wide, so swift, the surfaces hurled us out of the thoughts we wished to think, as waves thumped around us and spiders spun us into wide white spires. Nations flew upon their pillows, dove among starfish, twinkling insects, plankton brilliant black in the skies, and all of it held us within it, alarmed, beating our breasts with our fists, flare after flare, and soldiers of the king fired rockets, feared our convulsions, startled salts bursting in air. O mothers and fathers, you bear lineaments and seams, garments around you like silicone silk, milk of conception, egg and wagging stick. Our mothers and fathers, the bare lineaments and seams of garments around you like silicone silk, your pursed lips blow us across. Salt of us drowned, daring. Do you feel the pull, old diviners, among chitin starred backs of sand crabs, the yearn of our hands and your hands to meet beneath our chalk? More than matter, for we love our human horse, nostril breath blown quick, clay brushed from a sleeve, eyelash. Each new wave crashed past us onto the waking self, sun span, ocean path. Breaststroke, frog kick, flutter, flutter feet. Breaststroke, frog kick, flutter, flutter feet. Reach and breathe.
Thank you very much, Mary. And I always love the sagacity, home, feeling home, and the poignancy and your honesty in your poetry. It's just, just wonderful poetry, and you make me feel at home with your poetry. So, and you also, I love your inquiring mind. So thank you very much, Marijane, and it's always
Thank you for asking me, Harry.
Thank you, Marijane.
It's always a pleasure. And now our next poet is Mark Edward Rhodes. Mark Edward Rhodes was born in March in 1946 in Santa Monica, California. He has written 13 plays and 4 books of poetry. Mark has strength of narrative and a keen ear. Here's a wonderful poet, Mark Edward Rhodes.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Marijane. The first poem I want to read is, oddly enough, I got from a book by Italo Calvino, the Italian novelist. The Sword and the Leaves. The cutting edge sings its wind song softly in the night. There is a rueful misting falling on white gravel. There was no adversary today, but perhaps tonight in dreaming. A mountain of leaves in the yard has been formed into a tall cone. The hilt of the sword rises at its apex. A glint of moonlight glimmers there. The naked blade quivers in its warm bed of leaves, remaining cold. I'm going to also read a poem by another poet no longer with us. And I want to read a superscription from Tom Waits, the singer. You got to tell me, brave Kaplan, why are the wicked so strong? How do the angels get to sleep when the devil leaves his porch light on? The poem is by Rudyard, by Rudyard Kipling. How can I forget him? And it's what's going on now in Eastern Europe. And so this is one of my favorite poems by him. The Gods of the Copybook Headings. As I pass through my incantations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall, and the gods of the copybook headings I notice outlast them all. We were living in trees when they met us. They showed us each in turn that water would certainly wet us, as fire would certainly burn. But we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind. So we left them to teach the gorillas while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as the spirit listed. They never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor wind-born like the gods of the marketplace. But they always caught up with our progress, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field, or the lights had gone out in Rome. With the hopes that our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton. They denied she was even Dutch. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we worshiped the gods of the market who promised these beautiful things. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we give them our weapons, the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook headings said, stick to the devil you know. On the first Fenian sandstones, we were promised for fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children and the men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook heading said, the wages of sin is death. In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all by robbing selected Peter to pay to collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. And the gods of the copybook heading said, if you don't work, you die. Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew, and the hearts of the meanest were humbled and began to believe it was true that all that is not gold that glitters, and two make four. And the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. As it will be in the future, it will be at the birth of man. There are only four things certain since social progress began: that the dog returns to his vomit, and the sow returns to her mire, and the burnt fool's bandaged finger goes wabbling back to the fire, and that after this is accomplished and the brave new world begins, when all men are paid for existing and no man must pay for his sins, As surely water will wet us, as surely fire will burn, and the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return. This poem is called Frayed Fabric Falling from the Mercy Seat. A wind shift and shining forth. Who else but the maker can fashion a change in that which has been written in stone? A mob of men flanked by fear and bound in loneliness and were closing in on her, not knowing that conformity can be a comfort and a killer all in one. Still, the Old Testimony says that all are expected to see any certain act or shadow of an act from a similar point of view. Even when walking in procession, sunwise, without sustenance, until they drop and die without protest, gladly falling. At sundown, the shofar sounds, and the streets are filled with the shuffling songs made by feet all moving in the same direction. A progress, slow and solemnly practiced towards the Holy of Holies. All eyes on the bag of coins planted upon the bema before the drab and unmoving curtain. Still, in a half light, a mitzvah given by the decreasing power of the sun, the limp that limps through the small windows of the massive temple, telling them that this is how it always was and always will be. Since that last night on Sinai, with the fires lit against the approaching darkness, as they were all afraid, as they were all, each and every one of them, alone. Dust devils danced wildly across the open space outside the water gate of the temple that day. The arena was littered with stones, and the crowd, not the first to assemble there, no, that lot had already been sent away, but another just as dangerous, made up of the curious, sick at heart, and those who were simply baffled by this man in a tattered robe. And then there were those who were always looking for a shekel. A few soldiers had gathered just inside the portico. They had their orders and they were bored. Jesus sat with a woman holding her hand and whispering in her ear. She was crying softly, shaking and clutching at his cloak, trying to steady herself. She did not look at him, but he was staring intently at her. It appears no one here has condemned you, and neither do I. So go and avoid this sin from this time on. Upon hearing this, her tears began to flow like a river. I'm going to read a poem now I read a long time ago to Harry, and he liked it. So we're going to, it's about New York City. Harry lived there for a while, an actor. And wait a second. Yeah, I got the wrong page. This is called Eurythmics. Eurythmics. Wind music is making the snapdragon sway in moons of jerk and strut. A type of eurythmics mocking a waltz is taking place, pushed by the sound of a recorder or a panpipe playing. As the day slips in and the blossoms calm down for a while, still various shuddering, multicolored movements begin bobbing and weaving, as if memory would not leave them be. Bees are beginning to congregate. Tulips on Fifth Avenue muster outside the Plaza Hotel, their enormous fragile heads turning yellow and pink. The sun, a soft disk of light on the wide sidewalks, the sky shimmering anonymously. Taxis rumba and right themselves, stopping and starting, darting in and out. That woman walking away in the black skirt takes me with her. A little hip for the trip and the flamboyant shoulder slide. Flags and banners rustle and rip. A large crowd, far distant, unseen, is screaming over the 59th Street Bridge. A serpentine sonata of humanity. They are dancing among the flowers, among the concrete in the park, by the river. Inside a cityscape, never standing still, always moving, fast forward, without hesitation. The prime mover, never stopping for a second. The mindless, unknowable cause and rocking horse rhythms of life. How's the time, Harry?
We've got about 15 minutes left.
Oh my God. Maybe Marianne can help me. Let me see. 2:15. Okay. I've read this poem before. It's called I Was Born During the Last Days of Winter. Let's get the ball rolling. Such an odd and playful phrase. Everyone has a ball of some sort, and every ball is a different color. My ball is red and very small. I was born in March, the Martian boy. I loved baseball. I still do. A baseball is white until it gets scuffed. Someone once said, baseball is like life, but didn't explain why that was so. Someone else said, life is but a dream. To me, that meant it wasn't always real. We all get the ball rolling when we're young. If we're lucky, when we're old, it will slowly come to a stop. Then all will be quiet, hopefully. Then the rose won't require its fragrance. Life is a waiting game, even if we can't feel that we have been waiting for anything. What is it? We sometimes wonder. But no one will answer this question. When the ball stops rolling, then we get to know, or else won't get to know. But then it won't matter. I've decided that when that day comes, we will hear a sound from a faraway distance. We will be in a field of wheat ready for the harvest, and the wind will be all around us and within us. Then we will face each sacred direction there before lying down in a dream among the golden shafts of grain. And then we will disappear to merge into the light of the Ancient of Days and be still, but still turning there. Some call this place the Oblivion Palace, while many others call it something else. And I want to get this poem in. 24. Yeah. This is for a friend of Harry's and mine, a poet, a long time ago, no longer here. And for some reason, it's called Baptism in a Natural World. One, crepe myrtle, morning glories. Mixing soft breezes and warm weather brings the vivid pink colors of the crepe myrtle and roadside flowers back to me from so many years ago when they first assaulted my senses. I remember morning glories strung out up and over along the telephone lines beside the old even then Phillips service station just outside of town. It seemed that nothing could hinder their passionate purples reaching out, a yearning to join with the backyard roses and black-eyed Susan's absolute reign. Over the summer lawn, they're shaking in the wind beyond the protective shade, lent by the 12 tall magnolia trees blooming. Their broad-leafed canopies shielding the everlasting yard from the killing sun. Yet these peripatetic blossoms seem to be flaming like a choir. 2, full immersion. What has the sound of the river done for you lately? Everything, you say. I can hear it in my dreams. Small stones and pebbles have been molded there, keeping the secrets of life and death in silence. A slender moss cloth branch of a juniper tree sweeps down to fan the water's course, touching it so it passes quietly, so quietly. I once saw the sea at Biloxi, Mississippi, one early spring, but it was too wide and cold for me to make my own. Even the solitude of the Gulf only reminded me of hurricanes and tornadoes, the Eurocladon of the Lord. Here the river is kind. It can wash you clean. It can heal you always, in all ways make you whole. It can give you hope. It can move you to laughter and take away all your tears. As sorrows can drive you into the desert, the river can take you home. I once wrote for a friend, "Wherefore art thou? The rivers flow." He's gone now. Perhaps he's sitting on that bank of some other river. Perhaps he's on that beautiful shore. For Scott Lomberg. And just one real short poem left. Trying to find it here. Okay. We were, I was. Once I went by myself to Ireland. My wife went to Ireland and wrote this wonderful, wonderful book about mystical Ireland. Not mystical, but what would you call it? Ancient Ireland. Ancient Ireland. We've been there many times. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. And even when the bull chased us out of the field. So I went there by myself once, and I talked to someone in a town, and he told me the story. And after I read the short poem, want you to try and think, who was the person who died in this poem to him? It's called Entre Bain, by the sea below the fields of plenty. What was it like when you arrived there? Were the skies still blue? Are the sands where you now walk warm? Is there time to think? Things are about the same around here. It's been raining since you moved on. No, not outside. The sun is out every day. But in the vacant room where you used to sleep, where I stand looking at the floor, and I just let it come. I just let it come down. I let it come down. Wish me well in the days ahead. Later on, I hope to see you once again on the shore where birds call out your name and my name in a single singing breath. Any guesses on, thank you, any guesses on who has passed away? It's a young man. It's a young man, and it's his mom, his mother. And the Irish need the mother very, very much. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. I love, I've known you for many years. I think the first time I heard you read was a Beyond Baroque workshop where you read a poem about Cincinnatus. That was about serving in Vietnam, and it just knocked me out. And what I see over the years, I see a compassion in your poetry. I see connectedness of all of us with nature and spirit. And you've always had a deep attachment to Ireland. And I know there's a deep emotion in you, and you always have a great sense of rhythms and the landscape. And you're also deeply religious poet, and you have a sense of history and connected to what's going on today. So thank you very much for it. This has really been a comfortable reading from both of you. What were you going to say, Mark?
I just want to say thank you to Marijane. I had never read your poems before, and they're just wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
That I would say the same. I really enjoyed your reading, and it's interesting that we both read poets we enjoy too at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
You just have to share it with someone.
Yeah, I'm stuck behind the 1950s all the way back.
I was thinking about that. I had written down a question to ask if I had time, but you kind of pointed toward it. I said, what poets would you recommend the young poets to read? And Marijane, you mentioned when that poem about, when you first started, you fell in love with poetry. And then you mentioned Auden, Plath, Ginsberg, Stevens, Stanley Kunitz. And Mark, you read, well, both of you, Mark read two poems, one by Calvino and one by Kipling. And Marijane started out with a poem by Millos, and that was a fabulous poem. So it's good to keep touching these literary greats. What would you two like to talk about? We got about 3 minutes left.
I want to say that my memory is kind of like getting a little shaky, but the one poem I can recite all the way through, I think, is, I'm not going to do it now, is Auden's As I Walked Out One Evening.
I love that poem.
As I walked out one evening, I mean, it just has everything you need in all the ingredients for a great.
I love you. Yeah, I love that poem too. It's actually so rhymed that It's hard not to be sing-song when you read it, but the images are so beautiful and the emotions are so deep. I love that poem.
And I love it too, toward the end where he says, love your crooked neighbor with your crooked
Yes.
heart. Yeah, he was great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer, very much.
Jennifer.
It's our
Thank you,
pleasure.
Jennifer.
Of course. I have a question. When you talk about that poem in particular, where the rhyming lends it to be kind of sing-song,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mark, the rhythm that you present your poetry with it's soothing. And sometimes it's an incredible juxtaposition of being soothed by your recitation of it versus the topic that you're actually talking about.
Yeah.
Tell me philosophically where poetry and lyrics don't become one, because I love music, I love lyrics, but I know sometimes, even though it may become a bit sing-song, there is poetry that should never be set to music. Where are those lines for you?
I really couldn't tell. I would love to tell you. For me, I'm kind of, they just appear. They just come out of nowhere. I mean, I know that my poems aren't anything like anybody else's, but that's not always good. So, I mean, I like to be surprised, though, don't you? I mean, it's like to be. I mean, I was surprised by some of the endings of Marianne's poems. I didn't know where she was going, and all of a sudden, boom, she told me. And that's a good poet. For me, that's a good poet. A poet who can, leave you out there for a while and then woof. So I enjoyed that, and I did the same thing. I guess I just like the sound of the word or something. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's wrong.
And I like the seriousness of your poems too. That you're not afraid of the big topics, and so many people. It's almost like it's wrong in a lot of modern poetry to.
Yeah.
And I understand that, some of the big topics have been talked about so much that it's hard not to be repetitive. It's hard to be original.
Yeah.
But, each person's experience of life is unique too.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I want to read something that I feel enriched after reading it,
Good. I'm with you. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all, everybody.
Harry, you want to take us out? Tell us what's up for next week.
Next week, we have 4 wonderful actors, Corinne Conley, Helen Richmond, Tony Sawyer, Kay Wiseman, all residents of MPTF. They're going to read the poetry of one of my favorite poets of all time, at least in the modern time, of Anne Sexton. And Anne Sexton was along with Sylvia Plath and Adrienne Rich. And Adrienne Rich, as you know, was a revolutionary. She reclaimed language for women. And Sylvia Plath was the most dramatic, most literary. Anne Sexton, she put the body into the poem. And she had a tragic life, 1928 to 1974. But I just love her poetry. So we look forward to that. And thank you both for a marvelous reading. Thank you, Jennifer.